Welcome. This is Gutted. Loaves, fishes, and being more than the sum of your parts. I'm Dr. Stacy Markey, and today we continue our exploration of Season 2, Episode 2 of The Chosen. Its title, I Saw You. As the sun slips lower in the sky, the scene returns to Nathaniel, who still sits beneath the fig tree. Looking down at the ash that was once his offering to God, he takes a handful of it and lets it fall over his head. Scooping another, he tears at his clothes and lets the ash fall between the fabric and his skin. In Jewish tradition, grief isn't quiet. It isn't tidy. It isn't something you handle. It's embodied. You tear at your clothes because your heart feels torn. You cover yourself in ash because everything inside of you feels ruined. Nathaniel is standing in that raw place, that in-between space where the old story is gone, but the new one hasn't shown up yet. The final words we hear from him are a half whisper. Do you see me? Back at the campsite, night has fully settled and everyone is asleep, except Phillip, who's tending the fire. He's probably replaying the events of the day and really hoping Jesus returns tonight. Hearing movement, he looks up and sees Jesus approaching the camp. He stands, walking, to meet Jesus halfway. They exchange the familiar shalom, and Phillip begins to introduce himself. But the look on Jesus' face makes him stop, mid-sentence. Wait, did John tell him? No, Jesus says. He remembers his face. He was standing next to Andrew when John baptized him. It's such a simple statement, but it hits like a wave. Recognition is one of the simplest and strongest ways human beings build belonging. It's more than being seen. It's being known. It confirms that you are not just another face in the crowd. For someone like Phillip, who's spent years following John through deserts and riverbeds and the emotional rough terrain of other people's repentance, being seen by Jesus hits in a place deeper than reputation or knowledge. It's identity level. Jesus asks about his cousin, and upon hearing that Rome is still annoyed with him and that John considers that to be a strong sign that he's doing God's work, Jesus sighs. Yeah, that sounds about right. Jesus and Phillip fall into this easy back and forth, like two people who are already comfortable with each other. Phillip says John sent him with a message on his behalf. Jesus says he also has something to say to Phillip. Both messages are short, only 2 words. They pause just long enough to register the weight of the moment. Then, at the same time, Jesus calls Phillip to follow him, and Phillip says he will. Philip's calling is different from all the others. Each time Jesus has called someone to follow him, there's been some sort of miracle, or at least a conversation that led to the calling, like Thaddeus and little James. But Phillip, he's already been in spiritual boot camp with John, which is basically the first century version of being thrown into the deep end of ministry and being told to swim. So, Philip stepping into Jesus' circle isn't a leap. It's a continuation. John thinks he's ready. And Philip, being Philip, is eager to launch right into the message. John spoke with someone. But before he can get a full sentence out, Jesus stops him and gestures toward the fire, saying, "Shall we?" It's the same rhythm we saw on the rooftop with Nicodemus. Nicodemus came anxious and with so many questions. Philip comes energized and bright. Two very different men, two very different emotional states, but Jesus meets them in the same way. He brings them out of physical darkness and asks them to sit in the light before he speaks. Sitting does something to the body. It says, "You're safe," and it says, "Stay present." It slows the mind, steadies the breathing, and makes room for the person to listen. It also levels the ground. Nicodemus, a Pharisee, was accustomed to speaking from above, teaching, while Philip, a follower, was used to learning from below. But when Jesus says sit, he's saying this isn't about hierarchy. It's about relationship. And the light, it matters just as much as the posture. Jewish teaching says night magnifies the yetzer, the inner pull toward fear and confusion. In the dark, worries grow and perception warps. The brain becomes more threat sensitive and people misread what they see in the dark. So, when Jesus brings both men toward light, he's helping their hearts and their minds to steady. Truth lands deeper when the body is calm, when the light is warm, and when a person is sitting still enough to receive it. Philip begins again, saying, "John spoke to someone the last time he was in prison." "Someone?" Jesus asks. Philip clarifies, "A Pharisee who was shaken by a miracle he observed in the Red Quarter." We know he's talking about Nicodemus, and Jesus knows it too. He smiles, saying, he knows this man. He would even go so far as to call him a friend, which totally throws Philip for a moment because John would definitely have some opinions about that. Jesus just shrugs. Meh, he'll get over it. John's job was to prepare the hearts and minds of the people for Jesus' arrival. So after he baptized Jesus and declared him to be the Lamb of God, he was watching for signs that Jesus was beginning his public ministry. So when he heard about the wedding in Cana, he knew it was happening. The waiting was over. Jesus was going public. So he sent his best pupil. John knew what it was like to lead a diverse group of people that were focused on the Messiah. But he also knew the chaos, the infighting, and the exhaustion. John knew that Philip would be not only a faithful disciple, but also an excellent example and mentor for Jesus' current followers. Of all the things John taught his followers, timidity was not one of them. Leaning forward, Philip asks, "What exactly is Jesus doing in the Bashan?" Jesus keeps it simple. They're just passing through. Philip guesses Caesarea Philippi, and Jesus confirms it, but then adds that Syria will be after that. Philip sits back, surprised. Wow, okay, first Samaria, now Syria? There is absolutely no doubt in his mind that Jesus and John are cut from the same cloth. Jesus nods, like, yeah, it's a thing. They're both drawn to the margins, to the people, places, and situations most would avoid because they're too messy or risky, or both. Philip says that if he didn't know better, he would think they both had a death wish. Okay, this is not on the list of approved insights from how to win friends and influence people. Philip's comment is the kind you put out there so the other person laughs it off and says, yeah, no, it's nothing like that. Because just below the surface, Philip has a nagging fear, the kind you push away, but it keeps popping back up. Philip's accustomed to John tickling the tiger, which always holds a risk of imprisonment or even death. But Jesus, the Messiah, the one the prophets foretold? What would it mean if the Redeemer of the world had self-destructive tendencies? How would that fit into his paradigm of what a Messiah is supposed to do? The expression on Philip's face turns from subtle sarcasm to genuine concern. Urgency in his voice, he says, what? A death what? Jesus looks up like he's a little surprised to see Philip sitting there, because for the last few moments, he was lost in his own thoughts. Shaking his head, he says, it's nothing. He's still trying to figure out how to frame the conversation. That's why he's been gone for a couple of days. He's had a lot to think about. Philip, with his amazing capacity for empathy, says, yes, he can imagine. Then, doing that thing he does, Philip changes the subject, and Jesus lets him. So, while in Syria, will they go to Damascus? Jesus, taking a deep breath, sits back, saying, no, not the big cities. They'll go to the smaller places. Matthew, who was sleeping on the ground against the pile of logs he stripped, begins to stir, letting out a soft groan. Both Philip and Jesus look at him like a parent watching a sleeping child. Recognizing his exhaustion, Jesus says, he'll wake him later. Then he tells Philip he should get some sleep. They have a long road ahead of them the next day. He'll tend the fire. He stands. He has one last question, actually a request. He has a friend in Caesarea Philippi, an architect who he hasn't seen in quite some time. If there's time, he would really like to see him, but only if there's time. Jesus, who understands the importance of relationships, replies, of course, because if they don't make time for friends, they won't have any. As human beings, we are drawn to relationship from the moment we enter the world to the moment we leave it. A newborn needs physical contact, relationship to survive, and adults need it to thrive. We're built for attachment, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. It makes sense that human beings, created in the image of a God who exists in perfect relationship with himself, Father, Son, Spirit, would be drawn toward connection. Our pull toward closeness isn't a flaw. It's the imprint of the one whose very being is relationship. Of course we seek closeness. Of course we long to be known. That longing isn't weakness or neediness. It's design. As Phillip heads to bed, Jesus stays by the fire, deep in thought. Sparks drift up into the dark. He looks toward the heavens, the stars, the very same sky Nathaniel screamed into earlier, asking if he was seen. The scene changes as morning begins to settle over the camp. Prayers are uttered, shaloms are exchanged, and the fire is stoked. The camp sounds make their way to Mary and Rama's tent. Rama slowly opens her eyes and sees Mary already dressed, ready for the day. Worried, Rama asks if she overslept, but Mary assures her the sun is barely up. Relieved, Rama begins to stretch, but her body protests. Oh man, sleeping on the ground is not comfortable. Mary smiles, saying, "It gets easier." Then chuckles. "Well, actually, you just get used to it." Rama notices Mary packing. Mary explains that she packs every morning. With Jesus, you never know if you will be in the same place one night or a week. Rama lets that sink in. This is going to be hard. She knew following Jesus would change her life, but she just hadn't really thought about how this was all going to work. Big life changes often happen in stages. First comes the yes, the emotional leap. Only later does your brain start calculating what that leap actually means. Rama is feeling the weight of the second stage. It's the quiet shock that happens when enthusiasm meets reality, and your brain is like, wait, what did we just sign up for? Mary, looking over her shoulder, says she thinks everyone is struggling with the what is this? Rama asks Mary, what about her? How is Mary struggling? But Mary doesn't hear the question. Her mind has gone somewhere else entirely. Up to this point, Mary has been the only woman traveling with a group of men. She trusts Jesus more than anyone, and the rest of the guys in the group are like brothers to her. But even within a first century family relationship, there were strict lines around gender, learning, and social roles. She's been included, but also set apart. So Rama arriving doesn't just make camp feel different, it actually makes the future feel different. Mary finally speaks, but not answering the question Rama asked. Instead, her face brightens as she remembers the day before, the men reciting prophecy. It was exciting. Rama agrees, yes, exciting, but also a little bit intimidating. Mary doesn't deny that at all. She just says with this sudden resolve in her voice, they need to catch up. Mary isn't just making a statement about biblical knowledge. She's realizing, maybe for the first time, that she isn't alone anymore. She doesn't have to stand at the edge of these conversations. She doesn't have to absorb every new teaching in her own mind by herself. She now has someone to learn with, someone who understands what it means to be a woman following the Messiah. For Mary, Rama's presence opens a door that had previously been cracked, but not fully open. Rama, hesitant, tells Mary she can't read. Mary is undeterred, saying, no problem. She'll teach Rama to read and write. She already knows who to ask for materials. Across the camp, Simon, Andrew, and Thomas are inspecting the firewood. Thomas, who the day before was concerned about finding enough wood, is impressed, saying, it's more than 2 days' worth. Simon sighs. Yeah, but it's wet. Then Philip arrives, rubbing his hands together, trying to keep warm. He says the wood is damp, not wet. By nightfall, it will be perfect. Simon looks up and, giving credit where he thinks credit is due, tells Philip, he did well. Without missing a beat, Philip says he didn't do it. Yeah? Simon says. Then who? It doesn't even occur to Simon that the person responsible might be Matthew. Matthew, the one who found the wood. Matthew, the one Philip literally spent all afternoon teaching how to strip bark. Matthew, the only other human being out gathering wood yesterday. But the filing system in Simon's mind doesn't go there, because in his mind, Matthew is filed under the category labeled tax collector, not useful for manual labor. The human brain loves shortcuts. And once someone is placed in a category, we tend to keep them there unless something forces us to refile. Matthew is showing up differently, but Simon hasn't updated his filing system. So when Philip answers our young, smart friend, Simon doesn't picture Matthew. He pictures, well, anyone else. Andrew, little James, a passing shepherd, a random teenager who wandered into camp. Literally anyone but Matthew. It's a perfect example of how slow we as humans can be to revise our assumptions, especially about someone we've judged, resented, or simply misunderstood. Simon pauses, then asks, who? Thomas? Philip says, no, Matthew. Who's Thomas? Simon, still trying to process the Matthew being responsible thing, just points behind him, where Thomas stands kind of halfway raising his hand like, yeah, that's me. Philip apologizes. He's still learning everyone's name. Actually, it reminds him of a time with John. Andrew, being the little brother that he is, says Simon calls him Creepy John. Simon stands ready to wrestle his brother to the ground. Philip laughs. No, that's good. He likes it. Then he launches into a story about when John and his followers were evading Roman patrols along the Jordan. Thomas interrupts. Wait, you were on the run? Philip doesn't answer. He just keeps going. One day, John starts calling all of them by their actual names, and they just look at each other like, who's he talking to? Then they realized they had spent months together in the wilderness without actually knowing each other's real names, just nicknames. Andrew, with genuine affection, asks, how is John? Same old John, Philip says, then adds that he's really proud of Andrew, like a father. Then, tilting his head toward the morning sun, says, it's time for a nap. Wake him if there's work to do. Oh, and thank Matthew if they see him. Simon watches Philip walk away, still a little confused by the whole conversation. Andrew is glowing after hearing John remembers him, and Thomas looks like a man who has accidentally wandered into someone else's family reunion. It's the first morning with Philip officially woven into the group, and already the dynamic has shifted just a bit. There's more warmth, more humor, and a little more room for people to be who they are. Join me next time when, on the road, Jesus and Simon need to have a chat, and Philip finally sees his friend, Nathaniel, and nobody's life will ever be the same. This is Gutted. Loaves, fishes, and being more than the sum of your parts.